The Premier League needs no introduction. So I'll instead use that time to say, we'll be going through at least the top 4 tiers of English football. So if you support one of those clubs and have an interesting fact or just a little tidbit about your stadium, I'd love to hear them, so please let me know in the comments. Anyway, let's get into the stadiums. We start off with Emirates Stadium, home to Arsenal. It's one of only a handful of Premier League stadiums built this millennium, and the design certainly reflects that. It's reminiscent of Estádio da Luz in Lisbon. After all, it was designed by the same firm. The interior is almost identical. It's made up of 4 tiers of bowl seating with the top tier undulating, which is kinda cool. Although I don't often talk about atmosphere, the Emirates is often called the library by away fans, which tells you everything you need to know. But it's certainly a great looking stadium. Oh, come on. You shush. Villa Park, home to Aston Villa. If I wasn't already familiar with the stadium, I'd swear that Villa Park was the name of a housing estate. But no, it's definitely a stadium. It has more of a traditional design than the last one, with 4 individual stands that have slowly conjoined over time. And some of those stands, particularly this one, have a beautiful brick facade. On the inside, the seats are done up in the club's colours of claret and sky blue. After all, they were the first to wear it, and it has since become a very popular choice for other clubs. The Amex, home to Brighton and Hove Albion. It was built a little way out of the centre of Brighton and Hove, in a village called Farmer. The stadium features a very distinctive sloping roof canopy that almost slopes all the way down to the ground behind each goal. This is partially due to the disparity in size between the different stands, and it looks pretty good as well. The interior is also quite visually striking. It just looks very spick and span. It's a great little stadium, this one. Turf Moor, home to Burnley. It is arguably the most simple of the Premier League stadiums, but some would say that's a good thing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think that's a Bob the Builder quote, correct me if I'm wrong. It's made up of 4 completely separate stands. No frills, but it gets the job done. One thing I really like about it is that due to the stands on the west and the south being considerably smaller, it offers those sitting higher up in the other stands a pretty decent view of the surrounding hills and Burnley itself, which I believe they call the Venice of the North. Stamford Bridge, home to Chelsea. Out of the so-called Big 6 clubs' stadiums, Stamford Bridge is the smallest. It is, however, the biggest stadium in Fulham, rather than Fulham's, and it's currently the oldest Premier League stadium. In those 140 odd years, it has hosted basically every sport under the sun, even greyhound racing. On that note, why is it always greyhounds? I'd love to see a pug race. Anyway, Chelsea have well and truly made the stadium their own since the days of the greyhounds, particularly on the inside where it's very Chelsea. Yeah, not too shabby. They do have a rather spectacular upgrade planned, but that won't be for a little while. Selhurst Park, home to Crystal Palace. In some ways, it's a shame that Crystal Palace aren't one of the bigger clubs, because the potential for a stadium for a club named Crystal Palace is immense. If you're unfamiliar, the nearby area in which the club used to play is named Crystal Palace, after the incredible building that went by the same name. That was unbelievably built in 1851, and a big budget stadium inspired by the Crystal Palace would be freaking incredible. Maybe one day, but for now, Selhurst Park is adequate. It's very old-fashioned. I mean, Two of the stands still have those obstructive support pillars holding up the roof, but I like that old-fashioned charm. Goodison Park, home to Everton. Famously, this ground was built after Everton moved out of Anfield, and it has since hosted more top-flight football than any other ground in the country, so that's good. But the move out of Anfield did spawn their arch enemies. Goodison Park is a good-looking ground, and it's loved by many. However, it is aging. As you can see, once again there are those support pillars on some of the stands, which obviously isn't ideal. So the grand old lady hasn't got too many years left, as Everton will be moving to what seems to be an absolute beauty of a stadium. Hopefully they take the atmosphere along with them. Elland Road, home to Leeds United. It's not too dissimilar to the last one, from the bird's eye view at least. And it too has some outdated design elements, such as, yet again, pillars supporting the roof in some sections. But after consolidating their position in the Premier League, the plans to upgrade and expand the stadium to a capacity of around 55,000 seem likely to go ahead. Interestingly, Elland Road was originally known as the old Peacock Ground, named after the adjacent pub. And I've got to say, they should have kept that name instead of naming it after a road. The old Peacock Ground. I like it. King Power Stadium, home to Leicester City. It's been 5 years since they pulled off the unthinkable, and I'm glad to see that the wheels haven't fallen off since then. Given Leicester's relative success, their stadium remains quite humble, but they are planning an expansion. I don't think any design is set in stone, but it could end up looking like Cardiff City Stadium, which is no bad thing, but hopefully they go for something a bit different. The stadium's current design is far from being something a bit different. There are quite a few stadiums in England that look very similar, in particular, one that's coming up later in the video. The interior is just a simple single-tier bowl, but it looks fine. Anfield, home to Liverpool, the club that was formed when Everton moved out. It was a prudent decision to name the club Liverpool. It could be a small reason behind the club's popularity in Liverpool. It just casts a broader net than the name Everton. But winning helps with the popularity as well. Anfield has one of the best looking stands in the world. I am of course speaking of the main stand, particularly the exterior. It's modern, but the facade is mostly made of brick, so it looks fairly traditional at the same time. And on top of that, literally, the roof canopy is fairly unique. It kinda looks like the brim of a baseball cap or something. The rest of the stadium is a little more typical, but also pretty darn good. Etihad Stadium, home to Manchester City. This one has a short history, but a unique history. It was originally built for the 2002 Commonwealth Games, but it was always going to be converted into a football stadium afterwards and was designed as such. The stadium's most unique feature would have to be the cable-supported roof canopy that's held up by these masts that surround the stadium. The cables kinda look like giant harps. I wonder if you could play them. What do you know? It's a bit out of tune, but not bad. The interior is made up of a double-tiered bowl structure, plus a separate tier of seating on 3 out of 4 sides of the ground. And not too far away is Old Trafford, home to Manchester United. Although the name Old Trafford isn't referring to the ground itself, it is true, it's quite old. And it's showing its age in some areas. But nevertheless, it's the biggest and arguably the most famous Premier League stadium. I said arguably, okay? Let's just get that clear. The exterior consists of a lot of brick and glass, which looks great. But something Old Trafford is especially known for are those inclined roofs, which give the stadium a unique look on the outside, but on the inside it sort of blacks out and blocks off the upper seating, particularly on the Sir Alex Ferguson stand. And there's something about that that has to add to the intimidating atmosphere. The fear of the unknown, I guess. Feyenoord's De Kuip has a similar situation. I kinda like it. St James's Park, home to Newcastle United, the northernmost Premier League team. For some reason, I really like the slightly unusual asymmetrical design of this stadium. This was done because, as you can probably see, there's a shortage of available land on two sides of the stadium, so they simply didn't have room to expand further. The additional seating had to be put on the other sides, causing this lopsided design that we have here. Other than that, the design isn't too unusual. Just like Crystal Palace, they could have really played off the team's name and made a new castle-like exterior, like what you see on many college football stadiums. But then, once the castle's been around a while, it becomes an old castle, so it would be irrelevant. Carrow Road, home to Norwich City. After 4 big boys in a row, we're back to something a little more modest. It's not like they can spend a load of money on a huge stadium, they're not rich. But they don't need a big stadium anyway, this one is perfectly fine. It's actually one of my favourite of the smaller stadiums, but I don't know why exactly. Maybe it's simply just those yellow and green seats. They really stand out when watching it on TV. It was particularly noticeable in the last couple of seasons without any fans. Oh, and there's actually a hotel hidden somewhere in the stadium as well, which is kinda cool, but where is it? Oh, that's gotta be it. St Mary's Stadium, home to Southampton. It's the red version of the King Power Stadium. Although I shouldn't say that, I should say the King Power is the blue version of St Mary's, because it actually did come first, by a grand total of 1 year. I don't know what else to say, it's just the same as the KP really. I guess there's probably some good fish and chips nearby. That water right next door is technically a river, but the sea is right over there. Let's just move on. Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, home to... darn it. I forgot. For a couple of years it was the newest Premier League stadium, but as you'll see later on, another team has put an end to that. It still has to be the flashiest stadium in the league, and arguably in Europe. Although I don't think there is an official flashiness index to go by. But just look at that. I don't often say this about a stadium, but it's a sexy stadium. I mean, look at that giant cock rule up there on the roof. A golden cockerel is amongst the most sought after stadium features. But a more useful feature that I particularly like is the south stand. That's just one big wall of seats. The interior is definitely better than the exterior though. Don't get me wrong, it looks great. But it also looks like... yeah. Vicarage Road, home to Watford. On the surface, the Vic doesn't look too far out of the ordinary. It's a fairly typical ground made up of 4 individual stands, with one stand that is particularly built up. But perhaps the most peculiar thing about this stadium is that one of the stands is named after Elton John. Sir Elton John, I should say. He is of course a Watford supporter, and formerly the major shareholder, president and chairman. But forget about that. I've just learned that for a brief period in the early 90s, this place was home to Wealdstone FC, which means that the Wealdstone Raider has most likely been here before. Forget about Elton John, his fame pales in comparison to the great man. London Stadium. One of the most generic names imaginable. It's the home of West Ham United. West Ham have one-upped Manchester City's Commonwealth Games Stadium and gone with the former Olympic Games Stadium. but by no means doesn't mean it's a better ground. It is actually a much maligned stadium. It looks alright to be fair, but I don't think the aesthetics are the main issue. Although from an Olympics perspective, it followed from Beijing's Bird Nest Stadium, which is a far more interesting design. But the disdain for London Stadium has probably to do with the fact that it's a bit soulless, and many of the seats are quite far from the action. And a lot of fans weren't too pleased with the move to begin with, regardless of what the stadium was like. But relatively speaking, in the grand scheme of the entire world, it's still a fine stadium. Molineux Stadium, home to the Wolverhampton Wanderers. You've got to love a bit of alliteration. Wonderful wording. The stadium's exterior is done up in a rather unusual colour. Parts of it are like a yellowish cream, with some hits of brown. I wasn't alive in the 70s, obviously, but I feel like you would see a lot of these colours working in an office in the 70s. Manila folders, old-fashioned computing devices, as well as that fake wooden furniture and brown clothing and all that stuff. I'm making it sound bad, but I actually quite like it. Not the 70s office, the exterior. It sets it apart from the other stadiums. Not that it wasn't already a bit different with that French-sounding name. Another thing that sets it apart are the curved stands on the side of the pitch. Usually stadiums that are made up of 4 individual stands don't have that. It just allows for a better viewing angle for those sitting on the sides. And the last cab off the rank is Brentford Community Stadium, home of the Brentfords. This one definitely doesn't look vintage. Like I alluded to earlier, it's the newest stadium in the Premier League, having had the misfortune of opening in the year 2020. This place is absolutely stunning. Just look at the sharp angles of the roof canopy. Magnificent. The first time I mentioned this stadium on the channel, I noted that it was squoze between railway tracks on all sides. The distance between the tracks and the stadium is so minute, you might even say it's a bee's dick.
Wait, no, you can't say that.
What?
Bee's dick, you can't say that.
Why the hell not?
Well, you've already made the joke about the cockerel, I let that one slide. But you can't make 2 jokes about a gentleman's sausage in the same video. It's British law, innit?
Yeah, I know about the law. I didn't know a bee's dick counted as a gentleman's sausage.
Yeah, well, it's a bit ambiguous, but it's just not worth the risk, mate, trust me.
Alright, fine. Well, anyway, it's a great stadium. One of my favourite small stadiums going round. Beestick.
Oh, you are an absolute
And those were the 2021-22 Premier League stadiums. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, have a good one.